Monica, and thank you so much for tuning back into my channel. In today's tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to sew this easy to sew peplum top because I've had quite a few requests for a peplum recently. I really hope y'all enjoy this one. It's going to be a great project to sew, especially if you're new to sewing with stretch knit fabric, because we're using a thicker, heavier weight knit to get the structured peplum look, and a heavier knit is a lot easier to sew than a really light, stretchy knit. So it's a great beginner knit project. I really hope y'all enjoy this one, and if you do, please give the video a thumbs up, and I would love it if you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on any more of my tutorials. And let's get sewing. For this top, I used about 1.5 yards of a thicker, heavyweight stretch knit fabric, although if you wanted a flowy, less structured top, you could use a lighter knit. And you'll also need a fitted shirt with sleeves to use as a template. To begin, fold your fabric in half, making sure the top edge is cut perfectly straight. Measure your waist wherever you want the peplum to begin. I got 33 inches, and add 1 inch of seam allowance to that number for when we sew the peplum together, so I got 34 total. The peplum is made by cutting a half circle shape, and we have to do a couple of calculations to draw out the waist. First, divide the number you got for your waist by 3.14. I got about 10.8. Then subtract a ½ inch from that number to build in seam allowance for when we sew the peplum to the bodice. I got about 10.3 inches total. Starting at the square corner where your fabric is folded, measure across the top edge and make a mark at the number you just got. So my mark is at about 10.3 inches. Swivel the tape measure down slightly and make another mark at that same number, and then continue measuring from the corner and marking down the fabric to create a quarter circle shape. Cut along that curve to cut out the waist of the peplum. Decide how long you want the peplum to be. I wanted mine to be 11 inches long, and add 1.5 inches for hem and seam allowance, so I got 12.5 inches total. Measure starting at the curve of the waist and make a mark at the number you got for length. Move the tape measure down the curve slightly and make another mark at that number, and repeat the process of measuring from the waist and marking to create another quarter circle shape. Cut it out to create the peplum's bottom edge, and when you unfold the fabric, you'll have a half circle shape cut out. Fold it in half with the correct side of the fabric facing together, and pin and sew along the straight edge using a ½ inch seam allowance for all your seams. Since we're using stretch fabric, use a ballpoint needle and sew all your seams and hems with either a stretch stitch or a zigzag stitch, which will allow the seams to stretch without breaking. Set the peplum aside and grab your shirt. Find the point on the shirt where you want the peplum to start, where you measured around your waist earlier, and fold the fabric below that point up out of the way. Fold your sleeve into the center of the shirt so it's no longer visible, adjusting it so you can see the curved shape of the armhole like so, then repeat with the other sleeve. Finally, fold the shirt in half down the center, and this is our bodice pattern. Fold a portion of your fabric over a little wider than the shirt, making sure it stretches the most in the direction the arrows are going so the bodice will stretch around you once it's done. Lay the top onto the fold of the fabric and pin it down. Cut at least a ½ inch larger for hem allowance around the neckline, and then cut exactly a ½ inch larger for seam allowance around the shoulder, armhole, side, and bottom edge of the shirt. When you remove the shirt and unfold your fabric, you'll have a bodice piece cut out, which you'll use to cut a second bodice, and I cut a lower neckline on one for the front of the shirt. Lay them with the correct sides together and pin and sew along the shoulders and sides, then try it on to make sure it fits you well. Mine was a little big, and I needed to take it in to get slightly narrower as it went down the sides. To make sure I took both sides in evenly, I sewed the amount I needed in on one side and trimmed the extra fabric off. I flipped that piece over to cut the same amount from the other side, then sewed that seam as well. I also used a seam ripper to remove the extra stitches, and the sides fit great. The shoulders were a little too wide too, so I folded the bodice in half and trimmed them down slightly, and I also decided to lower the front neckline a little more. Remember, it's okay if something doesn't fit perfectly the first time, and that's why I like to show you how I do alterations when I need them. To make a sleeve pattern, lay your shirt so the sleeve is straightened out where this top straight edge is the folded edge of the sleeve, and this curved seam that looks like half of a bell shape is where the sleeve and armhole are sewn together. Place a see-through piece of paper like tracing or tissue paper so the straight edge is lined up along the folded edge of the sleeve. Look through the paper at the curved bell-shaped seam and trace out that shape. Then trace along this diagonal edge, making the sleeve as long or short as you'd like, and when it's the length you want, draw a straight line back to the edge of the paper, and make sure to write on the pattern where the folded edge was. Remove the shirt and draw new lines a ½ inch larger than your pattern for seam allowance on the curved and diagonal edges, and then at least a ½ inch along this bottom edge for hem allowance. Cut around those new lines to finish making your pattern. Fold a section of fabric over, pin the pattern onto the fold, and cut around it. When you remove the pattern and unfold the fabric, you'll have a sleeve cut out, then cut a second sleeve. Fold them in half with correct sides facing and pin and sew along the straight edge, then turn them right side out. Use straight pins to mark this point at the top of the curve on both sleeves, which is where the sleeves will sit at your shoulders. To attach the sleeve to the bodice, turn the bodice inside out and the sleeve right side out, and flip the sleeve over so its bottom edge is facing toward the armhole. Slide it into the armhole, making sure the correct sides of the fabrics are facing together. Match up the shoulder seam on the bodice to that point you marked with a pin on the sleeve and pin them together, always flattening out the seam allowances when pinning. Then match up the underarm seam on both the sleeve and the bodice and pin them together. Line up the curved raw edges and pin them together more frequently around the entire armhole, and when it's all been pinned, sew around the armhole to attach the sleeve, and repeat to attach the other sleeve. Turn it right side out and measure to find the center of the waist. Use straight pins to mark this center point both on the front and back sides. Turn the peplum inside out, position the seam so it's on one side of the waist, and use a straight pin to mark the opposite side. Rotate it so the seam is at the center back and that pin is right on top of it at the center front. Use straight pins to mark the new sides, so now the waist is divided into 4 sections. Lay the bodice with the front side facing up and slide it in neck first through the waist of the peplum, so the correct sides of the fabrics are facing together. Grab that center back pin on the bodice and the seam on the back of the peplum and pin them together. Then grab the center front pins on both pieces and pin them together. Grab the side seam on the bodice and the pin on the side of the peplum and pin them together, and pin the opposite sides together too. Finally, pin in smaller increments around the rest of the waist and sew to join the pieces together, so now your peplum is attached. To hem the neckline, turn it inside out, and I like to start at the back of the neck. Fold the fabric over about a 1/4 inch once, then fold it over again another 1/4 inch so the raw edge is hidden, and pin it down. Continue double folding and pinning, smoothing out the fabric with your finger as you go to help it lay flat. When you get to the shoulder seams, open up and flatten out the seam allowances before folding them, and then repeat the process around the front of the neckline. Pinning frequently and making sure the fabric is smoothed out will help the hem lay neatly around the curves. When you finish pinning, sew around the neckline to secure the hem. I find that using a wider zigzag or decorative stretch stitch helps flatten out the thick fabric so the hem lays neatly. Double fold, pin, and sew to hem the sleeves the same way, and repeat that process to hem the bottom edge of the peplum, and now your creation is finished. Thanks for watching. Oh, heck, I don't know what just hit my hair, but... Ugh. Do I have anything in my hair? Please tell me. You tell me, right?